Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast. My name is Matt Wood, and this is episode 98. My guests today are Kevin Ferguson, a writer who grew up in the hills of Mountain View, right near where his grandfather Mario ran the Gemello Winery for nearly 50 years. Today we're discussing the Judgement of Paris, and especially the 25th and the upcoming 50th anniversary tastings. In 1970, Gemello nearly swept the 25th anniversary tasting. Kevin is writing a forthcoming book about his family, and you can follow along at his Substack at gemello.substack.com. He also had a phone conversation with Mark Golodetz, a former European correspondent for The Wine Enthusiast, and the organizer of the 25th and 50th anniversary tastings. The 50th is taking place on February 1st in Westchester. I also want to let you know tickets are still available for the Embracing Hybrid Grapes in California conference at UC Davis on January 26th. You can get tickets at embracinghybridgrapes.com. And a reminder that I have a Patreon at patreon.com/IndieWinePodcast. Link is in the show notes also. If you're enjoying the podcast, any amount to help me keep telling wine stories ad-free and especially available for everyone is appreciated. It's all run independent. Telling a friend or sharing on social media are great ways to help out too. Here we go. From your studies, what made the Judgement of Paris so important in the California wine industry or wine industry at large, I guess?
Yeah, so the Judgement of Paris was a landmark event that transcended or transformed the wine industry worldwide. And it was especially important for California, of course, having two California wines pretty much, I wouldn't say unknown, but worldwide they were lesser known wines.
Yeah.
And the fact that 9 French experts blindly picked those two California wines as the best wines in the tasting, that was, pretty incredible. And the fact that France had been, really ever since Prohibition, they really took an opportunity to capitalize on the fact that during, that 14-year period, 1920 to 1934, there wasn't, we had 600 wineries in California, and it went down to 300. The only ones that were able to survive, except for bootleggers, were ones that were making wine for the church, or the
like
sacramental
BB
wines.
And
right.
Winty.
And so it went from 600 to 300, and then it went up to, after Prohibition, 1934, a bunch of them went up to the number of wineries that were producing California wines were, I think, about 400. But a lot of those didn't survive. Mm-hmm. And so it shrunk again. And I think in the 60s, it got down to about 200, 225.
Okay.
And then it started to go up again. So we had a lot of ups and downs throughout that century. And it's pretty remarkable that in 1976, two California wines beat the French elite.
I mean, I guess California wine was just starting to kind of grow back. You had like Mondavi and, of course, the others getting settled and making good wines. And did Stephen Spurrier, he visited California and kind of tasted some of the wines, or were they brought back?
So what happened is he had a business partner, Patricia Gallagher, who ran the French wine school next door to his wine shop, the Caves de Madeleine. And they would host a bunch of foreign embassies tasting different wines, most likely, the wines for their countries. And Patricia Gallagher was from the U.S. She was from Delaware. And she went to California on vacation and went to a bunch of California wineries, and then came back and said that we've got to do a California tasting. And Stephen Spurrier said, well, we need a raison d'etre. We need a reason to do it. We need a way to market the event. And she said, well, it's a no-brainer. We got to do it for the bicentennial. That's a big deal, American independence. And he said, is it? We never celebrated it in England, having lost the war. But Steven Spurrier was one who never to shy away from a marketing opportunity, and so he went along with it.
That's funny. Yeah, I guess looking at it from across the pond, it wouldn't be a cause for celebration necessarily. He was portrayed by Alan Rickman.
Right.
Really interesting in the Bottle Shock movie.
Exactly.
They had, I think, was it Andrei Chelichev's group kind of bring some wines across the...
So I'm not really
tasting?
clear on exactly how they got the wines transported. It is covered in the Judgement Paris book. But what was fascinating is that he had trouble getting media attention. And, he reached out to all the French media, Le Figaro, Le Monde, L'Express, and they all thought, well, if France is going to win, there's no story here, and so we're not interested. And George Tabor of Time magazine, he was also skeptical, but he knew of the wine shop because he had taken a course at Patricia Gallagher's at her shop, at her wine course. And so, and he being skeptical, writing for Time magazine, which was, a weekly magazine, and the event was on the slowest news day of the week. It was on a Monday. Time magazine went to print on a Friday. And so if nothing came out of it, it wasn't a big loss to George.
Okay.
And so he agreed to attend. And it wasn't until halfway through the white wine tasting did he start to feel like, oh, there might be a story here. And what happened was one of the judges, well, actually, let's back up. And the way that the event was, George was the only one who was given a scorecard and knew what the wines they were drinking.
Okay.
None of the judges knew what they were drinking. Of course, it was being a blind tasting. And so he was able to walk around throughout the event because he was the only reporter there. He had told in previous interviews, he had mentioned that, if he was one of many reporters, Steven Spurrier probably would have stuck him in a corner somewhere. But since he was the only reporter there, he let him roam around the room. And there was a point halfway through where one of the judges picked up a white wine glass, swirled it around, smelled it, took a sip, raised it again, and said, back to France. And Stephen and George Tabor looked at his scorecard and he realized that he was tasting Freemark Abbey from California, from Napa Valley. And he realized that, you know what? I may have a story here after all.
Yeah. It's been a minute since I've read the book, but maybe some of the French judges almost kind of got in their heads about, this was California or this is France, and trying to kind of like fudge the scores, or like if they think it was California wine, like way low score. And in fact, got kind of mixed up at some point.
Right. And initially, it wasn't supposed to be a blind tasting. So Spurrier made a change kind of at the last minute, maybe 2 weeks before the event. He was a little concerned that he had heard that 8 out of the 9 judges had never tasted California wines and may not even know where California was.
Okay.
And he's like, it's just somewhere north of Mexico. And so he decided at the last minute when all the judges showed up, and he said, I decided to change the rules. If you're not satisfied with these changes, then I'll change it back. But basically, I'm going to make it a blind tasting. And, what do you think of that? And they said, pas de problème, no problem. And the rest is history.
Yeah. So with the whites, Montelena got
so
first?
Chateau Montelena was the winner. And that's got a really interesting story. So Mike Gergish was the winemaker, and he was, and actually he just passed away just a couple of years ago. I think it was in 2023 at the age of 100. But in 1976, he he found out about winning the Judgment in Paris through a telegram of all things.
Okay.
And it was a day after the event. And back in the, and it was a relatively upstart winery that he had only been there a couple of years. And he was hired by Mike Barrett he was an LA lawyer starting this winery. And Mike Barrett wanted to focus on reds. And Gergich had to convince him that, it would take 5 years to produce anything worth selling. So I would suggest that we make a Chardonnay for early cash flow. And it was that 1973 Chardonnay that gave him instant credibility, but it was hardly an overnight success. So Mike Gergich had been working in the California wine industry for 15 years. He came from Croatia. His dad was, they made homemade wine. And he came here, I believe, in 1958 and got a work visa from Lee Stewart of Sovereign Cellars.
Oh, yeah.
And he only worked there for one harvest season. And after that, he, Lee Stewart was known to be hard to work for. And so he ended up leaving after that season, went to work for Christian Brothers, Beaulieu Vineyards, and then to Robert Mondavi, and then working again for Chateau Montelena soon after that. As I mentioned, he was, born and raised in Croatia. He was one of 11 children, and his parents ran a farm. They were illiterate, and they grew grain and vegetables and raised cows and sheep. And aside from the wine that they sold, they would drink all the wine that they produced within a year. Okay. And then the first week working at Sovereign Cellars, he had dinner with Lee Stewart's family, and they drank a 7-year-old Cabernet, and he thought that was really special.
Okay. Well, those cash flow wines are still a big deal when you're starting a winery. Even today, get some wines that you can make and get them kind of out the door.
No doubt.
And Stag's Leap won the red,
right?
Famously.
So so that was actually a relatively new winery as well. It was started by Warren Winiarski and his wife Barbara. I think it was in 1971 when they launched it, and it's funny how Napa Valley was such a small community, and Mike Gergich and Warren Winiarski had similar tutors. They both worked for Sovereign Cellars when they got their start in California. Warren Winiarski also had a father who he was Polish roots. Dad made homemade wine. And Warren Winiarski in the 50s was a college professor in Chicago. And he reached out to, I'm not sure how he found out about, I'm blanking on his name, Martin Ray in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And Martin Ray offered him an internship, but made him take a test first. Okay. So he reached out. He had to do a test with his son, Peter Martin Ray, who was, I think, in Wisconsin. So once he passed that test, then he was allowed to come over to the Santa Cruz Mountains and work for him for a week. And after that week, Martin Ray decided not to hire him, which kind of bummed him out. So he started to write letters to other California winemakers, and this is 1964. And 6 years after Mike Gergich's term with Sovereign Cellars, Lee Stewart ended up hiring him as his number 2 man on a 2-man operating team. He ended up working there for 2 years, but he wasn't satisfied being the number 2 man on a 2-man operating team. He wanted to run his own shop. And so Warren Winiarski ended up getting a job at Robert Mondavi's winery. Now, of course, we all know Robert Mondavi, genius marketing winemaker, but not a winemaker. He genius marketing man of the wine industry. And he needed a winemaker because his son was Michael Mondavi was supposed to be the winemaker, but he was serving a term in the military during the Vietnam War. And so he worked for Robert Mondavi, or Warren Winiarski was the winemaker for 2 years. And after, I think it was 1968, he ended up leaving to go out on his own, starting his own venture. A year later, he ends up hooking up with Nathan Fay, who was operating, he was a grape grower in the southern part of Napa Valley. And he made a small batch of homemade wine, and a lot of it was Cabernet. And he let Warren Winiarski taste his Cabernet, which really impressed him. And that gave him the idea that was a very fertile ground for Cabernet. And so, sure enough, soon after that, a 50-acre ranch, the Hyde's Ranch, right near his Nathan Fay's property, was up for sale for $120,000. And it wasn't being used for growing grapes, except for table grapes or low-grade grapes. Basically, it was a fruit farm. They were producing cherries and apples and low-quality grapes.
Okay.
So he didn't. So Warren Winiarski undercut the owner, offering him $10,000 less than the asking price, and not telling him what his intentions were for the property. And I think it was in April of 1970 or 71, they struck a deal. But Warren Winiarski actually didn't have $110,000. He and his wife scrounged up their life savings, which was $90,000, and his mom pitched in $20,000.
Okay.
And they were able to purchase the ranch. And that spring of 1970 or 71, they had their first harvest, and 2 years later, they had the winning harvest with 32 tons of grapes, and I think they produced 1,800 cases of wine, and one of those was, of course, that famous Stag's Leap that won the contest at the Judgement in Paris.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, him working for Martin Ray for a week, too, that's a good story, because I think Martin Ray was probably made Lee Stewart look like a real easy boss. There's a lot of stories about Martin Ray.
Yeah,
and,
so
like disowning people because he doesn't like their friend or things like that, you know.
Right. Martin Ray, in fact, my grandfather, I mean, we can get into this a little bit later, but or we can talk about it now, when Rixford Winery in Woodside, which was a very famous winery pre-Prohibition, started by Emmett Rixford in 1884, and it was, very successful. In fact, in 1915, the Pan American Expo that was hosted, he won the gold medal in the wine contest there.
Yeah.
And then he died in 1928, but his children carried it on. But in the 1940s, they decided to get out of the wine business. And they had about 8,000 gallons of wine from 1938 to 1940. Some of them were bottled, but many of them were in 1,000-gallon casks. And my grandfather, Mario Gemello, who was running the Gemello Winery in Mountain View, got a call, and he said, all our inventory is up for sale. Do you want it?
Yeah.
And so he went with his father, great-grandpa John Gemello, and they brought trucks and took everything, and they beat Martin Ray to the punch.
Okay.
Because Martin Ray got a phone call, or found out about it somehow. It must have been a phone call. There's no email back then. Yeah. And so he ended up taking or he ended up purchasing a portion of that from my grandfather.
Okay.
I don't know, weeks or months later, from the probably the later batches of that vintages.
Of the last of the Rixford, La Cuesta, I guess, right?
Right.
La Cuesta wines.
But what's really fascinating about Martin Ray is he was a protege of Paul Masson, and Paul Masson, the Champagne King of California, which he was known of back then. It's kind of funny now that you can't. It's known as sparkling wine ever since the 2006 passed a law, some kind of law about that. But actually, the French wanted. They put that into the Versailles Treaty, after World War I, but nobody abide by it.
Yeah.
So that's pretty funny.
Yeah, I know those names. I mean, they were. I've read things with the Portuguese judges having issues with the California wines, or the port wines, and the California winemakers would say, well, it's port style, or it's champagne style, or Burgundy style and port style. But yeah, it's amazing how long that was able to go on though, until like 2006, and then some still grandfathered in.
Right. I believe the wines or the champagnes or sparkling wines that had champagne on the labels pre-2006, they were grandfathered in. They were allowed to keep that name, or keep that. They didn't have to change the labels.
Okay. And then, so there's been some kind of anniversary versions of this tasting over the years also, which is kind of our tie-in, I guess, with Gemello wines. How did those kind of come about?
Yeah, so in 2001, it was either late 2001 or early 2002, Mark Golodetz, who was the wine enthusiast, was a European correspondent for the Wine Enthusiast magazine, and he covered the industry, the European industry, throughout the 90s, and every time he would go to Bordeaux, he would get complaints lodged at him as if he had anything to do with it. Obviously, in 1976, he wasn't a reporter. Wine Enthusiast magazine, I don't think started until the 1980s, but he was a likely target just because he was part of the wine media. And they would complain to him that the Spurrier's tasting, they had all kinds of complaints. They picked the wrong French wines, the wrong vintages, the wrong, the wines were too young, so on and so forth. And so after hearing years of these complaints, Mark Golodetz decided to do something about it. And so he decided to host this event in New York, and he was going to only pick the best vintages from both regions, the Cabernets from California, and then the top wines from France. And a fluke accident happened as he was bottling up his wines from his cellar. And what happened is that he broke a bottle of Mondavi Reserve.
Okay.
And so he needed a replacement, something that fit the right criteria of 1970s. And he had been drinking Gemello wine for a while as his house wine. And I spoke to him, some time ago, and he told me that it was a wine exporter who turned him on to Gemello wine. So he had a couple of cases in his cellar, and he was just curious how it would fare up against these wines, and so these heavyweights. So he put it into the tasting, and he had 7 California wines versus 7 Bordeaux's, and had the judges. The judges had what he was instructing them to do was to determine whether or not a wine was French or Californian, rank their top 5, and then They were going to average the scores together.
Okay.
And sure enough, sometime after the event, my grandfather, who had been retired, he was 82 years old. He had been retired for more than a decade. He gets a call from Ray Isle, who is now the executive editor of Food and Wine magazine, but back in those days, he was the managing editor of Wine and Spirits. And my grandfather was, he's a very charismatic guy, loves to talk about wine. He was a little confused why he's getting this phone call, but he was like, sure, yeah, I'll talk to you. And he goes, they've had this 25th anniversary of the Judgment of Paris, and they were shocked. The judges were shocked that another California wine won. And my grandfather, wow, that's amazing. And he goes, but this time it wasn't a wine from Napa Valley. He goes, wow, well, that's interesting. Well, still, I'm confused why you're calling me. He goes, well, it was a wine from Santa Clara County. It was from Mountain View. It was your 1970 Gemello Cabernet. My grandfather was blown away, although he did admit that was probably one of two of his best vintages throughout his history. And maybe it's only second best to his 1960. And actually, Martin Ray comes into this picture as well. He's the one who planted this vineyard on Pierce Road in Saratoga. And that's where my grandfather got the grapes for that 1970 award-winning Cabernet.
Okay.
And actually, one more story about that. So Mark Golodetz, after the tasting, one of the judges was so impressed with that 1970 Cabernet, Gemello Cabernet, that he was willing to spare no expense. And so Mark Golodetz he said he would sell him a bottle from his private collection, but he was going to sell it to him at the same price of the highest price wine at the tasting, which was Petrus, 1970, which sold for $1,000 in 2001 or 2002. Okay. So that's a pretty amazing story that my grandfather, that was 2002 when he got that phone call, and he was dying of prostate cancer at the time.
Okay. He
lived for another 3 years. He probably told that story probably 50 times. Okay. In the next 3 years. That was his favorite story, in fact. And when he was towards the end of his life, he was going through chemo treatment, and at his last treatment, he was at El Camino Hospital, and he asked, when I was sitting with him, and he asked me, to bring him that article. He wanted to read it one last time, and then he passed away about a week later.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's a good story. You tell it every couple of weeks. Keep it fresh.
Absolutely.
Probably always gets a little better.
Yeah.
each time. Yeah, I think the 60. I've read that wine. I think some of that came from like the Ridge property. I think. And some Saratoga, right? Gaspar Vineyard.
So my grandfather was buying grapes from Montebello Road all throughout the 50s. In fact, I think it was the Short property that I'm blanking on his first name.
William.
William Short.
Yeah.
All throughout the 50s, he was buying grapes from William Short. And then in the mid 1950s, the Ridge founders, they hadn't started yet. They were engineers at Stanford Research Institute, and they were looking for. I think around that time, or they were on the verge of buying the Short property, and they went to go visit my grandfather at the Gemello Winery. They wanted advice about going into the wine business. And so, led by David Benyon and Hugh Crane, and the two, there were four of them, co-founders of Ridge Winery, and they go there and lay out their plans to my grandfather, and he goes, "You really want to do this in your retirement? This is I don't encourage it. It's a lot of hard work."
Yeah.
And well, they didn't really listen to him.
Yeah.
And in fact, they bought the property, and in 1959, before they actually incorporated, I think they incorporated in 1961, or they had their first harvest in 61 or 62, or maybe they launched their LLC by then, or a corporation. But in 1959, my grandfather became a customer, and he bought. I'm not certain on the tons of grapes that they bought, but I've written about it. It's I'm not sure if that was actually went into the 1960 cap that, but he made a wide range of varietals that he bought grapes from Montebello Road in Cupertino, as well as Pierce Road from Martin Ray.
Yeah, Saratoga kind of area. Yeah, because he had been running the winery for about, I guess, 20 years when the Ridge folks kind of approached him about the idea.
Yeah,
right?
so it was actually in
1934
is when, so basically, my great-grandfather, John Gemello, he came here in 1912 and actually worked for Paul Masson at Almaden Vineyards. And then he ended up going to work for Piketty Winery in 1915, and then on Montebello Road. And then I think in 1917, he ended up buying a vineyard further up on Montebello Road, which may be on or near the William Short property.
Okay.
And then he sold it in 1919, just before Prohibition, and then transitioned into, he pivoted into running a truck farm, a traveling farmer's market, selling vegetables house to house. But in, I think around 1925 or somewhere in the mid-20s, he ended up, because of there was a loophole in the Prohibition law that allowed them to produce 200 gallons of wine for your family, which is a crazy amount of wine for a family. That's 3 bottles a day, every day for 365 days.
Yeah.
And so he was around 1928, 1929. He was the grapes were becoming ready to harvest, and by 1934. He was ready to go for business. Prohibition ended in December 1933, and they went into business. They opened for business in January of 1934, and did their first harvest in that September, going to Napa to buy grapes from, which is a pretty funny story. Golden Gate Bridge didn't exist yet. Bay Bridge didn't exist yet. And my grandfather, who was 17 years old at the time, he was my great-grandfather's right-hand man, still in high school, senior at Mountain View High School. My great-grandfather took him out of school to go on a bumpy ride over to Napa and fill their truck with 10 tons of grapes and drive it all the way back overnight, and then had him unload the truck without any opportunity of going to sleep, and ended up falling asleep while he was trying to rack the wine, and it spilled all over the winery.
Okay. Wow.
So, that's a pretty funny story.
Yeah. So my great grandfather also used to be a Italian truck farmer.
Oh,
in
wow.
that same, a little further south, but like San Jose area.
Okay.
But he had a lot of friends over in like Mountain View and
Right.
that area. So
In fact,
might have run into each other
yeah.
at some,
I mean, it was a
at
small,
some point. Yeah.
very small community, and the fact that you know, if you're from Italy, or you know, I mean, everybody kind of helps themselves, help each other. They help each other out. You know, it's kind of funny that Guglielmo, who just celebrated their 100th anniversary last year, 1925 is when they opened, and they had they also came from the same northern Italy, northern Italian region of Piedmont that my great-grandfather came from in 1912. And I was meeting with George Guglielmo sometime last year, and we were just chatting about, you know, the old times and similar family stories. And I had mentioned that my grandfather actually, when he married my grandmother in 1940, my great-grandfather said, you know, I'll give you our 3-bedroom house on the property if you build us a smaller house. And which was his not so subtle way of saying that we want grandchildren, but we don't want to have to go very far. So in 1941, my grandfather, after working a full day in the winery, he would come in from the winery, have something to eat, and then my grandmother would encourage him to go back out there and work on that house. Okay. Because I don't want to be living with my in-laws much longer. And so, sure enough, it's funny. We have this little spiral notebook, a blue notebook that my grandfather kept all his expenses. He spent, except for, you know, his own labor, he spent $4,000 on all the materials for building the house next door. So getting back to Guglielmo, I had mentioned, you know, a variation of the story to him, and he said, well, you know, we did the same thing. We, as our family grew, we would build houses on our property. Yeah. And everybody lived on the same property. That's not the case anymore, but back in the 30s and 40s, they did.
Yeah, well, it was the same. My family also.
Yeah.
There were, 7 houses or something on the ranch property. You know, aunts, uncles.
And where were they from?
Genoa. Okay. And somewhere from more like Emilia Romagna kind of area. Yeah, northern Italy. Yeah. Again, which I think kind of most of the families that ended up in the peninsula and South Bay kind of area were from there. Right.
My great grandfather John Gemello, he had he was working at a famous sparkling wine company in northern Italy, which is actually probably more famous now for the vermouth that they make. And I'm blanking on the name right now.
Asti? Or
Asti it was Asti. And so but then in the evenings he would tend to he had his own vineyard. And, you know, part of the reason why a lot of Italians immigrated to California, I'm sure this might be similar to your family, is he would get letters sent from California from his friends who had immigrated, and they would write him letters saying that, look, you're only making 10 cents a day. We're making $1 a day. You should come out and join us. Okay. So ultimately he did in December 1912, and he left his wife and daughter and said, I would send for you when I have the money. And so he boards a ship and comes out to California. ends up working at Paul Masson at Almaden Vineyards. And after completing a big project one day, he went to go blow off steam at a Italian watering hole known as the Costa Hotel in San Jose. And he bumps into somebody he knew from Italy, of all places.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was Giovanni Beltramo. And a lot of people on the San Francisco Peninsula probably know that name because the Beltramo Wine and Spirits store in Menlo Park on El Camino was a very popular place to buy wine for more than 100 years, 132 years.
Wow. Okay.
Giovanni Beltramo was the patriarch of that 5 generations of Beltramos that ran that store. And Beltramo knew my great-grandfather from, back in the day, and the families knew each other in Piedmont. He said, where's your wife and family? I'm excited that you're here. And he goes, I had to leave them behind. I'm trying to make some money, and I'm going to send for them when I had the money. Well, that story just struck a chord with Beltramo because he knew what it was like to be alone in a foreign country.
Yeah.
He also had to send for his wife. He came here in the 1880s without his wife, and then sent for her later. And so he ended up loaning my great-grandfather $190, which is in today's money would be well over $5,000 for a first-class ticket for his wife and daughter to come and join him. And so they ended up, this is crazy to think of the way that they would have to travel. They ended up going up through France, boarding a ship in the English Channel across the Atlantic Ocean to New York, and then getting on a train across the country down to Cupertino, where actually at that time my great-grandfather was working at Piketty Winery. And a lot of these stories are, at least the stories about Gemello, are on an old cassette tape that my great-grandfather had recorded in the 1970s before he passed away at the age of 98. And my cousins, he was living with my cousins, the Obisters, who ran the Obister Winery in Half Moon Bay for 25 years. A lot of people back in the day may know that name. And so when one of the funny stories that was on that cassette tape about why, when they were going to move, basically when my great-grandfather's days of being a bachelor in California were coming to a close, and his wife and daughter were coming to live with him, he needed a bigger house to rent. And it turns out the Pikettys had a bigger house just off of their winery, just off of their property. And on the cassette tape, my great-grandfather described the scenario, why it was vacant, and it was because the guy who was going to rent the house was spooked by all the poison oak that was on the property. And my great-grandfather said, well, I have no problem with poison oak. I'll rent it. And so my grandfather and I were listening to this tape in about 20 years after it was recorded. This is in 2002 when my grandpa Mario was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And so as a bonding project, we agreed to transcribe these tapes together. So we're listening to this tape, we're listening to the story, and since my great-grandfather had a heavy Italian accent, my grandfather would stop the tape periodically and then translate what we had just heard.
Yeah.
So he's telling this scenario about, the house and why it was vacant, the poison oak. And my grandpa Mario stopped the tape and said, I don't think you have to put all that down. I would just type into my computer things that my grandfather would say. He goes, you don't have to put all that in the computer. Just all those details are really trivial details. Just put the date that they moved in. They moved in on New Year's Eve, 1915. And I agreed. I thought those were trivial details, not that important, at least not at the time. And we continued to listen to the tape, and then my grandpa stopped the tape again and said, you know what? He also said it rained for 4 days. I don't think you have to put that either. And I said, now these details are all coming together. I think they are important. He said, what do you mean? I go, well, think about it. His wife and daughter had been away from him for a year and a half. And now they're coming to live with him. And they move into a house on Montebello Road on New Year's Eve, 1915, and it rains for 4 days. 8 months and 27 days later, you were born.
Oh, sounds like a lot of good stories.
So that's another story that my grandfather told probably 50 to 100 times in the next 3 years before he passed away.
Yeah, the Beltramo connection, that's cool because I think Giovanni Beltramo, I think he imported some of the first grapes, first Italian grapes to California. I think like he was first, or maybe some varieties first, some varieties maybe it was the second, or like he was very early on though. Like when he worked for
he came in
John Doyle.
Right. I think it was around 1880 he came to California, Menlo Park, and ended up working for John T. Doyle. And John T. Doyle John T. Doyle was a very wealthy lawyer, San Francisco lawyer, had a summer home in Menlo Park, and then and turned that into a winery that Giovanni Beltramo basically ran. But he also had two wineries on his southern property, which was just south of there, which would become Santa Clara County. I don't think it was Santa Clara County yet. And he called them the Western Winery and the Eastern Winery. And the Western Winery, he put a post office on it. And in order to distinguish the post office, he named that post office Cupertino. And that's how the city of Cupertino got its name. And that's, the home of Apple computers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he did like the first water system. I think maybe for Cupertino,
right?
Stuff like that. Also, he's pretty interesting guy, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to do a full podcast episode on him at some point.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
Get around to it. I have a lot of the research floating around for it, but
on John T. Doyle?
Yeah.
Wow.
Just he wrote a lot. He was so involved in the early California wine industry.
Right.
Just all the meetings, and he was on like the board of viticulture commissioners, and he rented land to the university to use for the experiment stations, and he a lot of that early work, like we have him to thank for it,
right?
Because even something as little as like, hey, university, have these 2 acres of land to plant whatever you want on it and see what grapes grow well there in Santa Clara,
right?
Just things like that. So he was very like involved with education and everything. There have been other sort of anniversaries also for the Judgement Paris tastings, right?
So in I think 78 they had one, and then in 86, and this is what's fascinating about Ridge Winery is, when in 76, the French were just dying to have another contest because they feel like they were robbed, or the judges were, they messed up. And in 76 and 78, I'm not sure exactly who won, but I know the fact that Ridge Winery came in third in both 78 and 86. Okay. 86 is the 10th year anniversary. I believe that California wines did win, though.
Okay.
I think they did. But anyways, and then for the 30th anniversary,
Okay.
Ridge came in first place.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
so
Okay.
Montebello Wine District has consistently been very, very strong throughout the decades.
Yeah, that's amazing. And those were the 30th. It was the same vintages as the
So
the original,
for, I believe,
or
I don't,
older vintages.
I believe that the Ridge was 1971.
Okay.
The others that it went up against, I don't have it in front of me,
Sure,
but
yeah.
yeah, that's one of the things that I've written on my blog about Ridge, and so I believe I think that was 1971.
Yeah, those wines can really age well. And I guess part of what has us talking today is that there's a 50th anniversary coming up for the Judgment of Paris here.
Right. So on February 1st, Mark Golodetz and the former wine enthusiast European correspondent and the host of the 25th anniversary blind tasting is going to be hosting the 50th anniversary blind tasting. He's doing it in conjunction with David Hamburger of New York's Wine Workshop.
Okay.
So it's going to be Bordeaux versus California Cabernet again, poured blind with historic vintages from 1970 to 1991. I believe Gemello is the only one that's going to be from the 70s. But California icons like Gemello Cabernet, 1970, Heights Martha's Vineyard, Mayacamas, and then the 1991 Ridge Montebello is going to be in that tasting as well.
Okay.
For Bordeaux, is going to be countered with La Mission Haut-Brion, 1975, Rothschild and Latour, 1982, and Petrus, 1989, and Lafitte, 1990. And it'll be hosted in Westchester at the Hudson Prime Steakhouse.
Okay.
That'll be a pretty exciting event. And there's a number of other events going on throughout the year. Other events, the original 7 Napa Valley wineries from the 1976 Judgment in Paris are hosting their own commemorative events. Many include a curated itinerary of exclusive tastings and historical tours and storytelling. The wineries that are participating, of course, are Chateau Montelena, Stag's Leap, Clos du Val, Freemark Abbey, Heights Cellars, Mayacamas Vineyards, Spring Mountain Vineyard. And for more details on that, you can go to judgmentofparis50.com. And also, not related to Napa Valley, but Ridge Vineyards, of course, the winner of the 30th anniversary blind tasting in Cupertino, will be hosting their own events. And they've got a wide range of events on their website. One that's coming up January 29th. But it's pretty funny. It's called Yanks versus Franks.
Okay.
Charm City Wine School on January 29th. And then finally, for theater buffs, the Napa Valley Festival this summer will be hosting a one-act opera of the Judgment of Paris, celebrating the 50th anniversary. It's co-created by Jake Hagee and Gene Shearer. It debuts on July 18th, and details of that can be found at festivalnapavalley.org.
Awesome. I mean, it really did do a lot for Napa Valley.
Absolutely.
That tasting. Must have been amazing to be there at that time.
No doubt.
Before, after, just like hard line, probably down the middle of it in lots of ways.
No doubt.
I want to ask you how the book and the blog and everything are coming along.
Yeah, so that's still coming along. Still working on. Don't have a date on publishing yet, but I've been publishing stories, early release stories, as well as things that may not make it into the book. It's and also is incorporating stories about my grandmother that initially wasn't expected to be such a central figure, but now that she's 104, and I started writing many of these stories, researching a lot of the family history and the winery and so forth during the pandemic lockdown. And I was helping to do some caregiving of my grandmother. She was 99 years old at the time. She's now 104. She was actually, when I say caregiving, it was mainly a supervisory role.
Okay.
She was able just to make sure that she wasn't taking the car out to drive. She wasn't supposed to be driving, but she was pretty active. And as I was, spending time with her, talking to her, going through the old newspaper clippings of the winery, I started to realize there might be a bigger story or another story about her longevity.
Yeah.
So, I've been also writing stories about, she's part of the New England centenarian study.
Okay.
I was trying to figure out how she's still going at 104. And
That's
so,
cool.
There's a number of medical researchers who are studying her genes and studying her habits and so forth. There's something like 3,000 people in the study who are who've been they're at or over 100, and they've been studying their genes and their habits and so forth for the most part for the past 25 years. But they've been studying. Many of them passed away, but she's still going at 104. So
it's amazing.
So again, that's the reason. That's why the blog is actually called the Centenarian Playbook.
Yeah,
and you can find it at gemello.substack.com. It's a combination of stories about the winery and the wine history, as well as her longevity journey.
Yeah, it's a great. I guess maybe it's not a surprise. I like reading the wine stories a little more. I read that part, but I do read some of the stories about her also, and they're pretty great. So it's cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, lots of good.
I appreciate
lots
that.
of good family stories.
Yeah,
both of them. So, is there anything we have kind of missed or glanced over that?
I think we covered it pretty much. There's one thing, kind of interesting story, a little tidbit. In the 60s, my grandfather, as part of the challenges that the California wine industry was going through post-prohibition, he was a member of the Wine Institute. That was just kind of, I'm not sure. I think it started maybe in the 30s, and
it started pretty early.
Yeah, and
Horatio Stoll.
And in 1963, he was able to take a Soviet wine tour.
Oh,
and as well as it was Soviet Ukraine and Soviet Union wine tour.
Okay.
Sponsored by the Wine Institute, and so he got to. We have a lot of. He would write letters or write postcards to my grandmother just about every day, and so and we had the agenda, along with a lot of other historical things, and then the San Jose Mercury News ended up writing an article about it.
Okay.
And so I had, pieced all those things together, and through the postcards and the letters that my grandparents had sent to each other, one of the funny things is that he and also he kept a diary.
Oh, while he was there?
While he was there.
Okay.
And he pretty much wrote every
Awesome.
day.
Cool.
And one of the situations that he encountered, and what's also actually super fascinating, is that this is like this is like a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had to go to, before flying over to the Soviet Union, they had to stop in Washington, D.C. and get sign-offs on a number of papers from Congress. And then they boarded their plane and went over to the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And one of the first couple of days, actually, it was on the 4th of July of all days. My grandfather got sick. He got food poisoning. And next thing he knew, he was being hoisted on a gurney, taken to a Russian hospital, hearing nothing but Russian voices.
Okay.
And he was actually, they didn't hold any grudges against him. The doctors in Russia did all right with him, and they sent him back to his hotel within a couple of hours.
Okay.
But they joked that he was the problem child and he wasn't able to drink that next night.
Yeah, that must have been a pretty amazing trip, especially at that time.
Yeah.
Kind of surprised the Wine Institute had the pull to get that.
Yeah,
happening.
I actually reached out to the Wine Institute because my grandfather had written that he had 11 people on the trip.
Okay.
And he had mentioned like 1 or 2 people in his diary.
Yeah.
So I was looking for like a roster.
Yeah.
So I reached out to the Wine Institute, and this is a couple of years ago. And the person, I think, who was probably head of PR, he was like, we have a lot of things that are from that era that is just in boxes that we don't know where we can find.
Okay.
And also, there's a chance that a lot of that stuff is at the UC Davis library.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
history.
if it's not there, it should be there. If if they're not going to have the chance or the budget to go through all those boxes, then it's probably better off being at the UC Davis library where there's so much other stuff. You can go and check out boxes of it and go through it. So, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate having this opportunity to share these stories, and
enjoyed hearing.
Great talking to you about it.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for coming by.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time with me. I won't take too much of your time, but yeah, I'd love to hear how the Gemello ended up being in the 25th anniversary of Judgment of Paris tasting that you threw just about 25 years ago, I guess.
Yeah, it was the 25th anniversary. I decided to do a tasting to address some of the problems which the French had seen. And when we did talk about it, which wasn't very often, there was this undercurrent of them saying, well, it wasn't exactly a fair format. So what I decided to do was do the wines from the 70s, California, Cabernet against Bordeaux, and ended up just doing, I think it was 16 wines, 8 from each. And I had 16 judges, 8 professionals, including 2 people who ran chateaus in Bordeaux and the Negociant, some journalists, and also some very, very good amateurs, people whose palates I kind of trusted. And what happened with the Gemello was I was kind of leaving the cellar and I slipped, and the bottle of 74 Mondavi Reserve slipped, broke, creating an unholy mess and a lot of smells over the next few days. And the only thing I had was the Gemello. And I'd like the Gemello, but there's some thing when you buy a wine for $3.50 or $4, you kind of don't rate it the way you should do. Anyway, I decided to include it. And 15 of the 16 tasters thought it was the best wine there. And the 16 thought it was the second best wine. And only one person thought it was not French. And it was a bit of a sensation, obviously. And then when we looked at the bottle, what it showed was it was raised not in oak, but in redwood. And it was a 1970 Gemello, so it was supposed to be drunk within 5 years of the vintage. So it was already 25 years on beyond its sell-by date.
Wow, yeah.
And
That's amazing.
it wasn't a freak, Matt. It was. We've tasted the 70 since then. I tasted the 1960, which was perhaps even more compelling. This was a great winemaker.
So it was raised in probably a large redwood cask and that Santa Cruz Mountains fruit.
I imagine so. It's the only time in my entire life I ever thought about taking up winemaking, because I figured that I could find some land there and make wine of this quality, until I discovered that in the intervening 25 years, Silicon Valley had discovered it, and the land was fetching enormous prices as residential real estate.
Yeah, and unfortunately, some of those vineyards, especially in the Saratoga area that I think Gemello sourced from, have been turned into housing developments.
Long gone, yes. Sad.
Were some of those some of the things you were trying to address, was that you hear some comments about, well, the ages of the wines, maybe the French wines were too young in the original Judgement, or maybe wines weren't decanted long enough. Was that some of the comments you were trying to address on that 25th anniversary?
Some of the comments were I was trying to address. I mean, French wines are notorious that they have a very different life cycle to California wines, which are much more instantly likable. And doing it, say, 25 years afterwards, gave the French wines a chance to really blossom. Not that they did, but it gave them the chance. The top 3 wines from memory were all from California.
Were they really? Okay.
Gemello was one. We had a magnificent bottle of VV Reserve, which everyone was shocked by how good it was in 1970. I've yet to find a bottle of that quality. And then the Heitzmarters 1974, which is, as you would expect, was glorious.
Yeah, I bet. That's about the top of the mountain for that wine, 74.
And it was defeating the likes of Petrus 70, Latour 70, La Mission 75, 100-point Parker wines or whatever. And they were dwarfed by the California wines.
Amazing. And so you're doing the 50th anniversary tasting, and what's your thought process in gathering wines for that?
Well, I decided to extend it for a couple of reasons. Number one was 1970 was not a great decade for Bordeaux. 1980s was a really special decade. So we're doing it 1970 to 1991, which I think is much fairer. So we have some of the great players like the 74 Heitzmarters, the Meyer Kalmus. Phelps were making really fine wines from the Isley vineyard. So we've got one of those, Diamond Creek, etc. So we've got those. And then from Bordeaux, we've got 89 Haut-Brion, 82 Mouton Latour, 85 Cheval, which I think will show very well. So it should be an extraordinary event, and that's in February.
Very great. And probably goes without saying, but you must have some really experienced tasters and judges for that.
Matt, can I love you and leave you and I'll call you back or do this again?
Hey, Mark.
So we were talking a little bit about the original and whatever. By the way, Steven Spurrier really hated the movie.
Oh, did he?
Absolutely detested it. Hated the portrayal by Alan Rickman. And he bore absolutely no resemblance to Stephen.
Okay.
I knew him reasonably well. We weren't friends, but I knew him fairly well. We did a lot of tastings together, and we discussed it because he was supposed to have come to the 2001 tasting, and then something happened, and he couldn't make it.
Did he have other issues with the film other than the portrayal of him? Movie, obviously, you're kind of cutting out some stuff, combining characters. It's not a documentary exactly. Yeah.
Well, I think he felt that they played a lot of things for dramatic license without actually sticking too much to the facts. But we didn't. I don't really remember what he said about it, but I know he hated Rittman's portrayal of him.
Okay.
He pronounced it lugubrious, if I remember rightly. Septimus Snape is lugubrious. I like Rittman. I think he's a fantastic actor, but he was completely wrong for that part.
Yeah. Did you ever have any conversations with Steven about the original tasting? Something that ever came up? Okay.
I mean, it was a really interesting concept at the time, and it would have gone completely unnoticed but for Taverner of Time being there.
Mm-hmm.
Had he not publicized it, it would have been one of many, and it would have probably been a few years before something similar happened again.
Yeah.
But this really did rock the world.
I'm familiar with some of your career, but what was your interaction with the wine industry when that tasting happened, and did it resonate with you?
Yeah, mid to late 80s, I had a career change from real estate and decided to get into the wine industry. And I'd written some occasional articles for the Wine Enthusiast. It was called the Wine Express at the time. And I was going to Switzerland because my wife had got a job with Chase. And I decided this was the time to make the complete changeover. So I went to Adam, the owner of the Enthusiast, and told him that what he really needed was a European correspondent. And Adam said, "No, Mark, what I really need is a cheap European correspondent." So I was European correspondent for about 3 years before my wife and I were repatriated. And then I was an editor at large at Wine Enthusiast. And that went on. I left the Enthusiast full time in the early 90s and did some freelancing, bought and sold wine. And in fact, when I decided to leave the Enthusiast, this was at a time before Wine Searcher, actually. And I got into the car with basically my life savings and started picking up wines which I thought were underpriced, and spent 10 days bombing around the tri-state area. And then I resold the wines and started my company. And did fairly well with that. And part of the company was actually putting together wine tours long before wine tours were there. And we did a really fantastic Millennium Wine Tour in Bordeaux in 1999, 2000. Nearly came apart because there was a hurricane in Bordeaux around the 28th of December. So we had to make a lot of changes, but it was a really incredible time. And then after that, I've been in and out, sort of mostly in doing buying and selling and consulting for people.
Okay. Yeah, that's one thing I've always found interesting, actually, about the original tasting, I guess, is that a lot of the American winemakers were kind of on the wine tour in France at the time of the tasting, right? They kind of learned about it from Tabor. I think at least Bo Barrett learned about it while he was tasting at another winery, learned about the results.
Right. Yeah. I think the portrayal in the film was of a very unsophisticated American scene. And I don't think that really reflects reality. They were doing some really innovative, incredible things then. And I still think that the 70s and early 80s was the sort of golden age of California. But climate change has done a lot to the types of wine being produced both in Bordeaux and in California.
Do you think they've become more similar, or what's your outlook on, or kind of your take on California?
Well, I think the whole
Bordeaux
paradigm has
variety.
changed.
Okay.
I think for the greater part of the 20th century, um, wineries were lucky to get 12%, 13%, and there was a lot of chaptalization in Bordeaux. I think I heard that the average at Chateau Latour for most of the 20th century was under 12% and required the chaptalizations. Nowadays, of course, you're trying to keep the alcohol down. In Bordeaux, for instance, Trolong Mondo 2010 came out at 16.2%, which creates for me a fairly unbalanced wine. I'm tolerant of things up to around 14.2, 14.3. A lot of wines, though, in California and in Bordeaux are hitting higher than that, and it makes for slightly less balance. But the new age of critics are used to this higher level of alcohol, so it doesn't bother them, and they're able to push it to the consumers.
What are you most excited about for your upcoming 50th anniversary tasting?
The steaks. No. I think I want to see how the Gemello is doing. I think the Mayacamas 74 will be fascinating because it's always very difficult to get a read on Mayacamas without some serious bottle age. In 40 years, it seems to be about right. The Isley in the original tasting in '01 was the only corked bottle, so it will be good to taste it amongst its peers. 89 Aubryon has always been one of my favorite wines, so I want to see how that performs. And I think the sleeper wine there will be 1985 Cheval Blanc, which we've done a number of tastings of 82, 83, and 85 Cheval, and it sort of moves around, one being top one time, one being top the next. And it's a really fabulous wine.
Was there any thought to doing a Chardonnay tasting as well?
I'm encouraging David to do it. I haven't collected the Chardonnays.
Okay.
But I think it would be a great tasting. Interestingly enough, I did a ridge tasting about 10 years ago, and we included a 1973 Chardonnay. So that would have been at the time around about 50 years old. And it was magnificent. We were really shocked by how good it was. So we do know that there is some longevity with the California wines.
Yeah, I think the Mount Eden Chardonnay is another kind of nearby property to Ridge there. A lot of people really like those with extended aging on them. Also,
Yeah,
Baker's Mountains fruit.
They have one Surly and one not Surly, and I actually like them both, but in very, very different ways.
Yeah, be an interesting tasting at some point also, perhaps.
I'm encouraging David to do the Chardonnay tasting. I think that will be a very interesting one. Now, I think he's planning to do one later in the year, but all excitement is for this particular tasting. You're not the only person who's come to me asking about it, so
Okay.
it should be fascinating. I'm not sure if I'm going to write the results up. I'm sure I'll write the results up, but then we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah, it'll be fun to see, no matter what happens, it'll be fun to see how it all ends up. And, you at that age of bottles, you're dealing with the chance a little bit also of course with each bottle. So it'll be interesting and fun to see how they all come out.
Yeah, well, bearing that in mind, I actually have backups.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Not of the bottles themselves, because I think some of them are so rare it's almost impossible to get. But I have a backup. For instance, I have an 82 Evangile, I think, kicking around as a backup for Bordeaux. So I have two backups for each category.
Okay, wonderful.
So it's not an inexpensive tasting, so I want to make absolutely sure that there is enough good wine for it.
Yes, I'm sure there will be.
And failing that, I have a Magnum of 63 Hearty Burgundy.
Okay. That's the backup to the backups.
Backup to the backup, yeah.
Thanks for listening today. The Judgement of Paris really changed how California wine was seen on the world stage. Cabernet from the Santa Cruz Mountains has done extraordinarily well in the 25th and hopefully the 50th anniversary tastings. It'll be great to see how it all shakes out this time. You can check out Kevin's Substack, the Centenarian Playbook, at gemello.substack, or follow him at Gemello Winery on Instagram. And stay tuned for the results of the 50th anniversary tasting. If you haven't read George Tabor's book, The Judgement of Paris, that's a must-read for any wine enthusiast. Please follow the podcast on wherever you're listening and the Instagram at IndieWinePodcast. And feel free to email IndieWinePodcast@gmail.com or hit me on Instagram with comments, questions, or feedback. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love if you told a friend or wine lover about it and help spread the word. Rating, reviewing, or donating at patreon.com/IndieWinePodcast helps a lot too. There's also a Venmo for one-time donations if you don't want another subscription. I understand. It'll just offsetting podcast expenses, keeps it ad-free, available for everyone, and allows for more episodes. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.